Welcome to an introduction to PowerShell. My name is Brian Cafferkey, and this is going to be just a brief introduction to PowerShell. I'm going to talk about using the two ways of accessing PowerShell, the CLI and the ISE, and we'll do a little smattering on the language, but I'm going to follow up with additional presentations to get more into the language itself. So a little about myself. I'm a data solutions consultant and trainer, also a Microsoft MVP. I have decades of IT experience, and I'm the author of Pro PowerShell for Database Developers, which is available on Amazon or directly at apress.com. I lead two technical user groups, the Rhode Island Microsoft BI user group and the Southern New England R user group. And that's my book, which I think is a really good extensive coverage of PowerShell, and I hope you look into purchasing it. So what's ahead? We'll start by talking about what PowerShell is, and that'll advance into why do you need it. And then we'll look at the idea of, well, how do we use it? And there's two ways that we can use PowerShell. There's the command line interpreter, also known as the CLI, and there's the PowerShell Integrated Script Editor, or ISE. And then we'll do a very brief tour of the language itself. So PowerShell is a shell built specifically for Windows. And if you've been around the Windows world long enough, you may recall that before Windows there was an operating system called DOS. And DOS did not have a graphical environment to interact with the machine. Instead, you were dropped into a prompt, just like you see in this slide, and you would just start typing in commands. And the shell, with the DOS shell, understood certain commands like dir to get a list of files in a folder, or cls to clear the screen, and echo, and all kinds of commands that were designed to interact with the operating system. And that's really where shells started. They're designed to be a prompt, just a way to type in commands to interact with the operating system. Now the new and completely re-architected shell for Windows is PowerShell, because the old command prompt does not understand Windows, is not .NET enabled, and really is a legacy that needs to be forgotten and moved beyond because it's not supporting the new technology. A nice feature of PowerShell is that it was built on top of .NET, and so it makes it really easy to tie into the resources that .NET offers. If you're not familiar with .NET, .NET is the Windows framework, or the .NET is the object framework which underpins Windows and offers access to many resources in a very easy way. So kind of summarizing what a shell is, it's a prompt at which you enter commands, and operating systems that do not have a GUI such as Linux allow users to interact with a shell. In other words, without a GUI, just typing commands. A list of statements can be stored in a text file and executed as such, and those are, in the old world, we call batch files or just scripts, or shell scripts to be more appropriate. And scripts can be very useful to perform many different types of tasks, like doing backups, restores, and even to do some types of ETL processing, like copying files in and unzipping them and doing preparation and things like that, and then loading them into, say, a warehouse. Now we get to the question, why do we need a shell at all? Well, often we need a way to perform repetitive tasks. And while graphic interfaces are really good for a one-off, I'm going in, I'm creating a letter to my mom in Word or an Excel spreadsheet, or I just want to browse the internet, it's great for that, but it's not good for repetitive work. If I need to deploy a fix, if I'm a DBA and I want to install a patch on 1,000 SQL servers, suddenly the GUI is not such a great way to go because it's a lot of work. It's going to take me a long time. That's when I'm going to need a way to automate it. And that's what PowerShell is all about. It's letting us automate work. And this slide is meant to really kind of show you that PowerShell in many ways is like a hub that can connect us to all the different things in the Windows world. So here you can see everything from Active Directory to Internet Server to Azure to Excel, and PowerShell just really makes it easy to navigate around and manage these resources. Now PowerShell is also very network enabled, network aware, and one of the nice features of PowerShell is it can do what's called PowerShell remoting and start PowerShell sessions on multiple machines, on different servers. So this slide is meant to show you how you can use PowerShell to do support things like restarting services, restarting a computer or service, testing a connection, But also, if you were, say, a database administrator using the example I used before, and you needed to install a SQL Server patch on 1,000 machines, you could start a PowerShell session on each one of those machines and start the patches concurrently. So it'd be very quick. And when it's all done, they can each report back to the one that called it, the server that asked for these remote sessions to do this. And so you get a very nice way to administer resources in the network. PowerShell features include the traditional feature like piping, which is the ability to take the output of one command and push it into the next command, or to stack commands. So an example would be, I could do something like get a list of files in a folder, pipe that into another command which might filter out just the files which are more than a gigabyte in size, push that into another command which might say zip the files down, and finally push that into a command which might then store it on another machine. So that kind of ability to stack is something that is pretty unique to the operating system types of shells like Bash for Linux, and PowerShell supports that as well. Now, since it is a shell to the operating system, of course it has full support and access to all of the hardware, and for that matter software, in the environment. So you can pretty much navigate around and do things. And as I mentioned, it has built-in integration with .NET. PowerShell in particular is a bit unique for a shell language to an operating system because it's a full language which includes the ability to create and store variables, objects, collections, arrays, and hash tables. And the latest release of PowerShell 5.0 even supports the instantiation of classes and inheritance. So it's a full language and really can do all the same things you think of languages like C# or Python doing. And the nice thing about PowerShell also is it is not only a good language to administer Windows, but it's also really the language of Azure. So you can pretty much do anything you'd want to in terms of administering Azure resources, Microsoft's cloud, with PowerShell. Now, as I mentioned, there's two ways to use PowerShell. There's the command line interpreter, known as the CLI, and there's the integrated script editor, the ISE. And this kind of gives you a picture of what each one looks like. So when we go into the CLI, which is on the left, you can see in this little window, I typed in ls to get a directory of files, and then it gave me a listing. And it's just a prompt. It's just a window where you can type commands, and if the shell understands the command we type in, it will do it. If it doesn't, it will come back with some error saying, I don't know what you typed in. So it's just a prompt. On the right-hand side, what you really have is what any other environment, you call it an integrated development environment, but it's called Microsoft calls it the integrated script editor. And the idea here is we have a script editing ability, but we also have the embedded console, and you can see that at the bottom of the screen, a little window. It's the same as the CLI on the left, but it's contained in an integrated fashion within the ISE, hence the word integrated. So we can edit scripts there, we can dest, there's a debugger built in, so it's got a lot of features to help us develop scripts. So while the CLI is focused on getting in quick, typing commands, doing things that administrators typically will use, the ISE is really designed for developing programs. And when you're going to start PowerShell, if you're using an operating system prior to Windows 10, so Windows before 10, then you'll find it under Accessories. So you'll look for the Windows PowerShell folder under Accessories, and that's where you can access the programs. Windows 10, you'll go under Windows PowerShell. It's directly under that. It's not under Accessories. And under either one, if you're running a 64-bit operating system, then you'll have basically 4 programs, 2 of which are the ISE versions and 2 of which are the CLIs. The ones that have the parentheses x86 are 32-bit versions, and the other 2 are 64-bit. So generally you're going to want to use the 64-bit if you have a 64-bit operating system. Now I'm going to do a demo shortly of the CLI, but I didn't want to bring up something that's not obvious when you look at a CLI, and that is that you can customize the CLI considerably in terms of its visual appearance by going to the PowerShell icon in the upper left-hand corner, clicking on it and clicking on Properties, and you can see the pop-up allows you to do a lot of customization to this environment, which is kind of nice and not obvious when you first look at the CLI window. Something else we're going to look at is checking on the PowerShell versions. The PowerShell versions are all whole numbers so far, and they go basically from 1, 2, 3, 4, and the current version is 5. 6 is currently in development, but so I'm currently working with 5, and that's probably the latest, greatest you want to work with that's supported in production at this time. The way we can find out what version we're using is to use a built-in, display a built-in PowerShell variable called $PS version table. We can see it here. And we could just enter there, or we could do $PS version to get the version within that. And we're going to take a look at that. So $PS version table.ps version brings back information that tells us what version we're on, the major version being 5, and that's what we're looking for. So if you're running something prior to version 5, you may want to consider upgrading if possible. Now, usually that includes, the installation will include installing an upgraded .NET framework, so make sure you're not going to cause problems by doing that if you can't support that, or there's other incompatibilities you might run into issues with it. But if you can, I would recommend going to the latest version because it's going to give you a lot of compatibility, and it's really important when you get into things like Azure. Now, by default, scripting, or the ability to run scripts in PowerShell, is disabled. And because of that, you're going to need to enable it. Now, in order to change the setting in PowerShell to enable scripts, you need to have administrator privileges on the machine, and you're going to need to run PowerShell with these elevated privileges as shown here. So we're going to run as administrator. Once we get into PowerShell, the CLI, then we can set the execution policy as shown in the yellow letters. Now, by default, the setting is normally restricted, which means you cannot run scripts. But if we use the commandlet as shown here, set dash execution policy, and set remote signed, that will allow us to run any local scripts we have that we develop, but we require any externally downloaded scripts to be signed. So I'm going to do a little CLI demo, and you can follow along, and we'll demonstrate how to use the things we've just discussed. So I'm going to go into PowerShell, and I'm in Windows 10, so I have to navigate down to where Windows PowerShell is. And I'm going to run the CLI, and I know it's a CLI because it doesn't say ISE next to it. And I'll mention, you see the little messages, PowerShell CLI profile executed. I actually have that in a file which is called a profile. And if you're familiar with Bash, or even the old DOS world, you had auto-exec files, it's the same idea. You have this thing called a profile. Profile is a script you can create that when you start PowerShell, automatically executes, and the idea behind it is to allow you to tailor and customize the environment to the way you like it to look and feel. In fact, one of the things I do, if you notice, my prompt says PS, and then it shows the folder that I'm currently in. That's being done by my profile. It's setting the prompt. So I like to know where I'm located currently, and that's just helping me. All right, so being a console, I can do things like type in CLS to clear the console. And I want to point out something about CLS. CLS is not a built-in PowerShell command. It actually maps to a commandlet called clear host. And the way I can see, that's called an alias. And the way I can tell what aliases are set up, I can do a dir, which itself is an alias. And I can just take a look at the alias provider here. And this shows me a listing of all the different commands that are mapped. So I can see that if I look at PWS, that's a commandlet mapping to publish website, so they're equivalent. PWD, if you've used Linux, you're probably used to PWD, I believe gives you the working directory, and in PowerShell the commandlet that goes with that is get location. So if you don't like the commandlets here and you want to create your own words for things, you can use the alias to do that. I'm not going to get into how to do that currently, but I did want to point out what aliases are. So when I do something like CLS, that's an alias for clear host. When I do dir, that's an alias for a commandlet called getChildItem. All right. Now we want to look at what version of PowerShell we're using. So I'm going to do that now. And the way I'm going to do that, if you remember, is look at the PS version table. Now anytime you enter a variable in PowerShell on a line by itself, it just displays the contents of the variable. So if I do that, I get a lot of stuff in here, but I can see the first line is the PS version. Up arrow will give me what I last typed. The command comes back, the last statement. I'm going to do is I can also specify the PS version, and I get just that. Now this is really displaying what's called a hash table, and it's just showing me the contents of each name value up here. But here I asked for just a PS version, and it tells me it's 5.1, but you can see there's additional information available in PS version table. So again, if you're not running at least 5.0, you may want to think about upgrading. Now we mentioned the execution policy. And I'm going to clear screen again to make things easier to see. But I want to see what is my execution policy, meaning the ability to run scripts. So execution policy. And it says it's remote signed. And you might notice that I'm using mixed upper and lower case. I find that's easier to read. It's a good idea, especially in scripts, to do that. I think it's just good for readability. PowerShell is not case sensitive, so it doesn't really care. It will treat everything the same, upper lower case. So we have remote signed. I want to change it. I want to say set execution policy. I'm going to say remote sign. Now actually it is set to remote sign, but I want to walk you through how you would change it. If yours says restricted, you're going to need to change it to something else. And my recommendation is remote signed because it allows us to do scripts without exposing you to dangers from external scripts. And it comes back and it asks me, do you really want to do this? I'll say yes. And then you learn why I should have started as the administrator. So let me exit. And I'm actually glad that happened because I forget, and I do this a lot, to start as administrator sometimes when I need to. So I'm going to go back to Windows PowerShell. And I'm going to go here and I'm going to run it as administrator. And you see what happened. It gave me red messages. It did not like that I tried to change something. And you can tell I'm an administrator because it put me into the ever so dangerous directory, System 32 under Windows. But what I'm going to do here now is now I can say set execution policy. And I'll say remote signed. And now it asks me, and I can say yes and doesn't complain. So again, don't forget you need to run elevated privileges to do that. Now finally, I will talk about one more thing, not going to get into too much, but that's the ability to use modules. Modules are a way to extend PowerShell to give you more commands that you can do. And you can create your own in PowerShell, and I'll cover that in a future presentation. But to use a module, we use the Commandlet import-module. And this assumes the module is already downloaded to your machine. And I'm going to import one that's near and dear to my heart, which is the Azure RM module. And one of the common parameters you can use in PowerShell is called the common parameters. And I'm going to use one which is verbose because that will tell me what are all the commandlets that are being downloaded as part of this module. So Azure RM stands for the Azure Resource Manager. Prior to the latest portal, it used to be just Azure. But Resource Manager allows a much more advanced way of managing your resources. And you can see it's giving me all kinds of verbose messages that it's installing the Azure module. And you can see there's hundreds, I'm not sure how many, different commands that are available as part of that module. Let me clear the screen. And I'll just use one offhand. I'm going to use one that is login. And all of the commandlets start with Azure RM. And I'll say account. And what happens is you're immediately brought to a login window because you're going to log into Azure to do things. And this is a way to start your connection with Azure. I'm not going to actually log in right now because that's beyond the scope of what I want to cover. But I did want to show you that modules are great to extend things and give you a little smattering of how that works. All right, so I'm going to close out. Oh, one last thing I did mention. You have some ability to customize by clicking on the PowerShell icon in the upper left and do properties. And you can see there's all kinds of properties you can do to control what your CLI environment looks like. So I kind of want to step back again and review the execution policy options again. So we've seen restricted, which is the default, which means you can't run scripts. And we've talked about remote signed, which is what we set it to, but two other options you can use. One is unrestricted, which means anything goes, you can run scripts, and there's really no restrictions on that. And all signed means you can run any scripts as long as they're signed. Now we're going to look at the PowerShell ISE, or the Integrated Script Editor. And I want to stop by just taking a quick look at it, but it's really just a script editor with a console attached. That's really all it is, and a few extra features that make it easier and help us develop scripts. So we can see here the console is at the bottom, and we can pop in there and type things in if we like. And above that, we see a text window where we can just edit our scripts. And notice that we have a nice feature code colorization, which colorizes different types of commands in different ways. It makes it, I think, easier to read. And the right-hand side of things, you also see this panel, which allows us to, it's like a little wizard. We can locate commandlets, and it will help us build commandlets if we don't know how to use them. So let's step into a little demo of the ISE. And I'm going to go directly, I'll close my ISE that I'm running just to show you. I like to run things off the taskbar, but you can certainly go down into the Windows PowerShell off the menu. But I'm just going to run it directly here. And I'll load a script. So to load a script that's already run, PowerShell, and this is configurable, has recently loaded scripts, which is handy. And you can see you have all these things, opening files, things you would typically see. You can run what's currently selected. I like to use the toolbar for that, and I'll show you that. But a lot of different options here. And you have an edit menu to do all kinds of editing and things of your scripts. A view menu, which really is designed mainly to kind of rearrange the way that windows within the IDE work. And you can kind of change things around and turn off windows you want to see, those kinds of things. A debugger, which I have to be honest, I don't find in PowerShell. It's such a transparent language. I can always go back and highlight variables after the script is run and see what's happening. So typically, debugging is not as big an issue in PowerShell as it might be in some other things. But we do have it. We can set breakpoints and step through it and all kinds of good stuff. And I have add-ons that we can install and use and help. And one thing I will call your attention to is the Tools menu has something called Options. And if you want to change the colors, maybe you like the more trendy thing with dark, a black background and colored fonts and things like that. You can set all that here. So have fun at this and just change it to what you like. Font sizes, I like to push them up, especially for demos like this. And you can do that. Nice thing for demos also is there's this slider bar, which is really handy for demos like this to make things readable. So play with that and have fun with it. And I'll look at this also. If I want to get a command, something like get, let's say child item, it's nice because it navigates, and get child item I can display it, say show details, and I'll get almost a little like wizard that I can use to put things in. I'll type in kind of anything here, and I have two options. I can say insert, and you'll notice it shows up the console, and I can enter it, and it's obviously bogus, but you can see it entered the line for me. So it's kind of a way to build it. But I could also say copy, and then I could just paste it into the editor. So if you're not sure how to use a commandlet, that's not a bad way to play around and start with it. But just be careful that the commandlet you're playing with is not one like format my hard drive, because that would not be a good experience. All right, we're going to take it the syntax of PowerShell later. We'll take a look at that. But let's take a look at the console. Now I can do CLS. I can type in commands directly in the console, just as I did in the CLI before, because this is just, the CLI is really just embedded now with the script editor. And that's really the idea, hence the word integrated script editor. All right, so we can look at these things. The text editor here, if I want to, I did want to talk about the toolbar. So the toolbar is where I tend to spend most of my time. If I want to do a new script, I just click on the little page with the asterisks, and I'm getting a new script window, and I can type in things. If I want to open a file, you just use the folder. So this is just shortcuts to make it a little bit easier. It's a typical toolbar. Save is the disk, cut, paste, etc. If I want to run a script, I just execute this, and it will run the script. And I'll take a look at the thing there. So let me pull this out because it doesn't seem to like this for each object statement. But let me run that, and now it worked fine. But I just want to show that. If I highlight a line and want to run just a highlighted line, the little page with the green arrow will run just that one line. But if I want to run the entire script, I just click the arrow and it will run the entire script. All right, we've got a lot of these things. These other icons are mainly meant to arrange the windows and do some other tasks that aren't really relevant for now, but feel free to play around and get in here. But the main point of the ISE is to edit scripts, build scripts, which are really just programs. So now I want to talk about the PowerShell language. And the center of the PowerShell language are its commands, which Microsoft calls commandlets, CMD-LETS, or CMD-LET for singular. A commandlet performs a single action. A good way, if you're familiar with other languages, is consider it a function or a statement. Now what's interesting about Commandlets is it's the only language I know where you have a dash in the language, which is a little confusing because most of the time dash represents a minus sign, and that is true also of PowerShell. So it is a little strange, but it works out rather well because what Microsoft did in this definition is the format of Commandlets is a verb, a dash, and a noun, so it makes the statements very intuitive, like get info or something, and you can say, oh, that makes sense. For instance, if you look to the right, I've got get help, get process, start service. The nice thing about this verb-noun combination is it makes it very intuitive to understand what's going on. And the commandlets are designed to work with each other. So I might want to do something like get child item to get a list of files, and I can pipe that into select object to pick off certain properties that I'd like to see out of the information coming back, and that kind of thing, and I can stack the commands. The verbs are really nice because they're predefined as to what verbs are available, what you should be using, and so they have documented meanings, what they do. And the verbs are really the center to being able to discover what different commandlets do in PowerShell, and they call that discoverability. So commandlet examples are things like get-help, which gives you help on something, and the asterisk just means on everything, but you can get help on a specific commandlet. Get-process will give you the processes running in the system. Get location will get you where's the current location drive you're looking at. Set location sets the location, or write host to write to the console, and get WMI object, which is the Windows Measurement Instrumentation object, kind of an advanced feature for administrators. And we already saw set execution policy. So these are just some sample commandlets. Again, I mentioned this, but I want to emphasize Microsoft has a list of approved commandlet verbs, and you need to stick within those. Within PowerShell, we can create commandlets, or at least functions that simulate commandlets, and we should follow the commandlet naming conventions Microsoft has, which means follow those verbs. The noun has more flexibility in its naming, and I like to prefix the noun side when I create commandlets with my initials or something, so I know that that commandlet is not a built-in delivered one, but one I wrote. All right, so let me step back for a minute. I want to take a look at the language again. We were in here already. The first thing I'm going to show you is that to do a block comment, you use the less than sign and then the hashtag, and then you can type as many lines as you want. But to end the block of comments, the commented area, it's the hashtag again and then the greater than sign. So that's the way we do a block comment. An inline comment is just a pound sign. Variables start with a $sign. So that makes it really easy to identify what is a variable. And we want to assign a value, we just use the equal sign. And in this case, I'm assigning it 10 values. So I'm creating a collection or array. And as I mentioned, by highlighting a line and just running the page with the arrow, it just runs that single line. Now if I highlight just the variable and run selected, it will show me what's in that variable. Now you'll notice that this variable does not have any typing. I haven't told it what type of data to store there, and that means it's an object that can hold anything I want to put in it. But I have the option of defining a data type, saying in this case it's integer. If I do that, PowerShell is going to enforce the data type integer and not allow me to put, say, something like a string into this variable. So I can say something like sum equals 0. And notice we do have the semicolon as an end of a line. It's not enforced, but it is a good idea because at some point it may get enforced. And we have this for each loop going on. And notice that a block of commands, much like in Java or in C#, starts with a brace and ends with a brace. So this is a block affected by, under the control of the for each loop. And then we have a write host, and we can write things out. And write host just writes to the console. And it's kind of an odd commandlet because technically if you just were to put this highlighted area without write host, it will also display the console. Now something I do want to point out is when you use double quotes around a string and you're outputting it, you can just embed your variables directly in the string, and the $sign tells PowerShell it's a variable. It will expand it dynamically. If, however, you put single quotes around it, PowerShell will not expand the strings. It takes literally what you put in. So it depends on what you want. Usually you're going to want to do double quotes. Be careful. If you get confused as why aren't your variables being expanded, it's probably because you use single quotes. And we can do things like the variable sum plus, so it's typical mathematical plus, divide, times, there's asterisks, etc. Probably things you've seen in other languages. And there is the plus equal, that kind of incrementing that C supports. You can do that also with PowerShell. I just use this notation. Okay, and we already ran this before, and it just kind of loops through, and it iterating over each thing. Okay, one other thing I do want to point out is that when we're working in the CLI, I do something like this, I can do this, and you get IntelliSense. Now in other languages you might call that code completion. In PowerShell, since it's Microsoft, I think IntelliSense is a trademark, so I can say that here. But you can do that to get help. The other thing I would like to point out is that if I were to reference an object like sum, I get IntelliSense on the object. So variables, much like in Java or Python or anything else, are actually objects. And we have methods and properties available on them. And again, this is one of the features that makes it very robust to work with, because a lot of times I may need to do something and I might have a method available right on top of the object and not have to look for a separate command or function to do it. All right, so kind of summarizing or re-going over what we just talked about, notice the pound or hashtag is an inline comment. Dollar signs are the beginning. A first character of a dollar sign is the variable name. So dollar signs are how we name variables. We can strongly type or not type a data. So PowerShell is optionally strongly typed. We use braces to mark blocks of codes, much like C# or Java. And strings are a little interesting. It's very powerful that you can just embed variables within a string. A lot easier to use than if you ever use things like printf or something in other languages. A lot of times you have to put all these commas and tokens and mask it in. You don't have to do that with PowerShell. But if you do want to just display the name of a variable, you can use single quotes instead of double quotes. So there's a difference between double and single quotes in PowerShell. So in review, we discussed what PowerShell is, and we learned that it's a prompt essentially into the operating system of Windows. We discussed why we need it, and we learned that it's to automate work. We want to be able to write something, ideally as a script that we can just run, but even just to get in quickly and do one-offs, we want to do something quickly, having that immediacy of a prompt can be really handy. We learned there's two ways to use PowerShell, and one is the command line interpreter, the CLI, and the other was the integrated script editor. And we learned that the CLI is really designed to get in quickly, type commands, and doesn't support developing scripts, whereas the integrated script editor is designed to develop programs in PowerShell. And then we took a very brief tour of the PowerShell language, and we learned some of its key features. So I hope you got something out of this. Please feel free to connect to me. I'm on LinkedIn, and I do a lot of presentations at different user groups around mostly New England, but sometimes I go a little further out of my range. And I hope you like this. Connect with me, and if you do connect with me, please tell me what you thought of this video. And I look forward to having you on more videos. Thank you.